Boy, there's a lot going on here on a Thursday morning. Welcome in. We now say good morning to the mayor of Kansas City, Quinton on KCMO, assuming he's not looking to break down the second GOP debate last night. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. How are you?
I am doing well. I watched a little bit of it before I found much more entertaining programming elsewhere.
Well, maybe you were watching America's Got Talent. That's what my own producer was watching last night. So I can't even get the guys on the show to watch the damn debate. That's a problem here. We got some issues.
I think it's obvious that none of these guys will be the Republican nominee for president. It makes it perhaps interesting. I mean, you look at a group, Vivek is going nowhere. Most others aren't. I do think that, of course, Chris Christie landed his blows with kind of middle school style bullying. And Nikki Haley continues to run for nomination of a Republican Party I don't think typically really exists anymore. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, but I continue to believe former President Trump will be the nominee.
All right. Well, speaking of people who are in the White House or want to be in the White House, you welcomed the First Lady. I saw. Were you the first one to shake her hand coming off that airplane yesterday? Would you draw the long straw? How did that work?
Well, every time that we have a member of the first family or the second family here in Kansas City, we think it's important that somebody is there. I was proud to be there in the past. It's been Governor Kelly or Congressman Cleaver, certainly for the First Lady during my time here. Governor Parson, of course, as well, to the President of the United States. I was proud to stand in yesterday and to be the first. She is a very nice woman. We also, of course, joked about the Chiefs beating the Philadelphia Eagles last year, which made me smile, maybe made her say, I don't like these people very much.
Okay. Any future job prospects discussed in that one-on-one visit yesterday?
You know, as well-trained as I think I am, I think the position of secretary to the First Lady or White House social coordinator is not something that I would be able to do. Now, of course, there have been First Ladies in the past, like First Lady Clinton and others, who have had offices in the West Wing and that sort of thing. But Mrs. Biden and I did not discuss anything of the sort.
Okay. All right. Now, I know you've had a busy couple of days here. You were on the front lines with some of the UAW folks here in the region. So Take me through. I mean, that's obviously something that's having impacts here locally, not yet at the KCMO plant, but we know what's going on over at the Fairfax plant. You write here, or your staff writes here, this is on your official account, everyone deserves fair wages and fair benefits. You stood in solidarity with the UAW Local 31 workers in KCK. What do you think when you say fair wages, fair benefits? How do we define that?
I think there are a number of different ways, but I do think that you should be able to track actually what the salaries and wages are for our working class with what you're seeing at the executive levels. And since the government bailouts, and I imagine that there are a number of listeners of your show who might have disagreed with those during the Obama era, but when we saved General Motors, indeed, having some people call it government motors, for example, part of that was to make sure that workers not only stayed employed, but that the American auto industry could survive primarily so women and men throughout the Midwest and throughout the country could have fair wages to take care of them and their families. I think what we have seen since then is substantial returns to those in leadership, shareholders and beyond, and not those same types of increases to workers. And look, nobody's being unreasonable. Nobody's saying somebody needs to go to being a millionaire working on the shop floor. But we do think, and I agree with this, that you should see substantial increases there. I think that's what much of what UAW is asking for, better working conditions and beyond. I'll give one example. This came out of the KCMO plant, where I was talking to some folks during that heat wave we had earlier this summer who were saying, we're in our part of the facility, we're standing up all day without air conditioning. I think that is something that is wholly unacceptable today. And to the extent that type of work is being done, I think that should be compensated for.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like the headlines are always about 40% raises and 32-hour work weeks, not as much about AC and KCMO. I mean, I wish that got more attention because I think everyone would rally around getting the folks at KCMO air conditioning, but instead it sounds like it's more about 40% pay raises and, French-style 32-hour work weeks.
I certainly see that and have read the same. I mean, I think it's about a little bit several of those things. One, yes, the salaries would reflect, I think, the amount of work that you're doing. To the extent that the automakers are saying we can't modernize the facility or change the nature of work, I think compensation should reflect that, and that's what the pay increase would be for. And then for the hours, you actually look at that type of work, that would be the sort of thing, I think, where you're saying people do deserve to actually have what would be less of a week where they're standing up the whole time, particularly whereas here there is substantial overtime that a lot of these folks are working all the time, some of which is not voluntary. And so I think that this is a part of a negotiation. I don't think in any way this will make our workforce like the French, although I will note in many spaces the French do have a superior quality of life in education, healthcare, and any number of areas, but I won't get in those battles this morning. I'll just say I think we should make sure our auto workers are taken care of, who are the backbone of our economy, and all of those who are blue-collar workers in America.
Yeah, we don't have the time to get into the French government and healthcare system. Anyway, I do want to ask you, you put out an interesting tweet this week saying that you feel like the coverage at City Hall is not sufficient from the media, and you're wondering what to do about it. You could come on this show twice a week if you want. I got to believe your staff thinks once a week is plenty. So what are the things happening at City Hall this week that are not getting covered enough by the news media in town?
You know, I did see that someone kind from KCMO Radio pointed out to me that I could come on twice a week, give even further detail. I wouldn't want to bump Mike Francesa, though. So, I guess there are other shows, so maybe I'd get in there. A few different things. First of all, the police board had an extensive number of conversations about a few things that I don't think, people know that we're talking about all the time. The fentanyl crisis in Kansas City is something that is astounding. And while we're not necessarily hitting the numbers of a San Francisco, we're a city that actually isn't even 2 times the size of Kansas City, had about 845 fentanyl overdose deaths last year. In Kansas City, in 2021, our last year for which we have numbers, we had 180 overdose deaths. That is an increase from 100 in 2019. When you look at things that are tracking, like homicides, all that sort of work, drugs, particularly those types of drugs, need to be part of the conversation, right? We had a conversation on the police budget where the police chief laid out a plan to increase starting salaries for KCPD officers by about $10,000, getting them up to $60,000 a year. We had further discussion about budgeting practices at PD that got a little bit of attention. That was the one that did. And then finally, we had a meeting of our jail committee, our detention and rehabilitation task force. Let's talk about the path to Kansas City getting a new detention facility. That was just Tuesday, right? Wednesday, we're looking at more budgeting, actually more city work on fighting the opioid crisis, talking about migrant issues. And I say all this not to say that, everybody needs to care, right? I get that Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce will get a lot of attention, but I think what I am looking for, and Pete, I'm going to give you credit, because in the last 2 weeks, you've had on the mayor of Kansas City, you have on politicians certainly from the right, you have sports people, you have news people, you have the chief of police, you got a good number of people. I know you take criticisms from folks, typically from the other side, who say all types of things. I'm not your brown nose because I have disagreements sometimes, but when I look at it in a room like that, and I don't see reporters from, 120-year-old plus, print publications in this city, and I don't largely see the television or other electronic media, it makes you say, well, you can't just make the one story that you're going to run every now and then about a lawsuit or he said, she said, when we're trying to do all these other things too. So that's where I feel the need for more voices, but I don't know if that's going to change anytime soon.
Well, I think we agree. I wish that, we're not a news outlet. People always say you do it. Well, we're not a news outlet. We're a talk station. There are news outlets that call themselves news outlets that don't do the work that needs to be done, unfortunately. And you're right. I mean, it's a difficult time. It's a fragmented time for media, so there's a lot that goes into it. But, you bring up some interesting points there, the fentanyl overdoses that are not getting nearly enough attention. So I guess just on that one, I want to get to 2 things here on that quickly. The first one on the fentanyl issue, what's the answer?
A few different things. One, I think that there are, like everything, frankly, in society these days, and everybody's scared to say it, 2 solutions, enforcement and treatment. On the enforcement side, you need to make sure, and in many cases we do that work, but make sure that those that are caught in trafficking fentanyl, those who are part of criminal enterprises, getting these to people are serving not just sentences but severe ones, I think, is important. And really making sure that we stop fentanyl where it is coming into our country. This is a place where I don't think there should be daylight between left and right viewpoints. The enforcement is a crisis, both at the American border, American border with Mexico, but also in making sure that where we see it on our streets are getting real sentences. The second is in treatment. The people who are finding themselves addicted to these types of narcotics have incredible, often addiction issues. There are those who just stumble upon it accidentally and are dying. That is a huge part of the crisis. But when you're looking at the increasing number of not just criminal elements, but actually people who are almost zombie-like existing in our streets, I think that is where we need to do more. When you, and some of you in our city have done this, when you go through certain encampments and you see a lot of folks, maybe they've been arrested 100 times, they don't care, right? That's where I think a lot of this drug addiction crisis is. I had occasion to ride with LAPD in a ride along Los Angeles through Skid Row, where you've got thousands of people who in some ways are living in a zombie-like existence. You have got to find a way to get treatment. You've got to have a way to get enforcement, and finding local government resources, both on the PD side, health department side, are going to be a key way to do it.
Now, last thing on that front, you mentioned there, you're right. The media loves covering lawsuits involving you, the police department, things like that. That's it fits certain narratives. But I just want to ask, you mentioned there talking about getting police officers raises to $60,000. I don't know where you stand on that, but I'm curious to know, is that something you support? And if so, how do you square that with continuing ahead with this lawsuit that says the 25% threshold of KCPD salary based on the city budget is too much or is illegal? How should people square those two things?
I think they can square them easily, because it's not actually about how much the police department gets. It's about who gets to decide it. I believe in local control. This morning, I won't even say where you live necessarily, because people are crazy. But this morning, somebody's rising in Grain Valley, Missouri, and has the chance to say, hey, maybe I'm going to run for mayor because I want our city to double the amount of police that exist. Or I want our city to pay some different amount, or to focus on fire or something else. They'll get to run for mayor or city council, have an election, and that city has entire control on what they're going to spend to make sure they're looking at the priorities of their community. Today in Kansas Cityans don't have the same authority. So for me, I first of all, fully support getting our officers to $60,000 a year. As I shared with the police chief and the board of police commissioners, the question is, where do you actually make sure that you're saving money in other areas? How do you make sure your budget stays responsible to balance all of that? I think anybody in America, and you've got a lot of business owners who listen to your show each day, I think all of them want to pay their workers more. I don't disagree with them. But they would say, if I'm giving every worker a $10,000 a year pay raise, I'm going to have to make sure either I'm making a heck of a lot more money somewhere, right, or that I'm going to actually freeze increases in costs somewhere else, or save money on contracts or commodities elsewhere. And what we at the city have said to the Board of Police Commissioners a plethora of times is you could save money on information technology in working with the city of Kansas City, Missouri, to the tune of millions of dollars a year. You can save money on legal fees. You can save money on things like trash services if you actually worked with the city of Kansas City to do that. Millions and millions of dollars that could go into the pockets of our officers, our 911 dispatchers, and beyond today. What the Board of Police Commissioners has looked to do over the last however many years is not to do that, and in many ways to use the officers and, frankly, the fact that they're underpaid as a way to get a bunch of money that they're transferring to other things each day. This week at the Board of Police Commissioners, we transferred $175,000 from the personnel line item to legal expenses. Maybe you need to pay them, maybe you don't, but the thing that's astounding to me is we said, hey, we don't have $1,000 for bonuses for 911 call takers at a time they won't stay in Kansas City because we're paying lawyers. I mean, I don't know. I don't agree with that. And so this is where I think we need to make a change. That's the type of control that local control would give you, because I would be certain, much like we've done with firefighters, much like we've done with sanitation workers in this city, where we've said, you know what, Public Works Department or Water Department, we don't trust half the stuff administratively that you're doing, which has happened in our city in the past. We've switched fire chiefs. We've done other things, but we don't want to harm the workers.
But I got to ask you, because you guys gave a 12% raise last year to union employees for the city. The city council gave itself a 15% raise. What did you guys cut to do that?
A few different things. First of all, city council and the mayor don't get pay raises for 4 years by virtue of the charter. And so what you see there is actually us just catching up after a set of years.
What did you cut?
What do you cut?
No, I asked what you cut.
If you're given a pay raise once every 4 years, you don't have to cut something, right? But if you're actually going with about a $20 million increase on a $300 million budget, then I would expect that you have to find either revenue increases that are sufficient to cover that. And I will let you know, despite whatever increases happen in Jackson County, we will probably not have a 20% revenue increase. And so you will have to actually say, where else in the police budget can we find cost savings? And so in terms of the firefighters themselves, actually you do have more revenue sources that go to that. A fire safety sales tax that's dedicated to the fire department. Of course, you have earnings tax proceeds. And then you have a health levy that also supports the Kansas City, Missouri Fire Department. So you actually do have more revenue areas that can support increases, I think, in that vital and important area. And what's more, they're not bad at getting grants to help support things like ambulance services and the health care that largely KCFD is providing these days. What we're doing in some ways, everybody makes it political. It's a core kind of government administrative function, which is that, hey, where can you find the money for it? I guarantee you, if the Kansas City budget increases by 20% this year, then you will see a much easier conversation on the budget for police and everyone else. And to the extent it doesn't, and every department director wants more, then you're going to have more frustration with it.
Well, we will be watching. That's a conversation that's only in the early stages, Mr. Mayor. We appreciate you. Have a good day, and we'll talk to you next week.
Hey, enjoy Taylor Swift at the Jets game. It should be interesting to watch.
We will be following along. Hopefully, the game isn't that interesting because it'll mean the Chiefs blow them out. So thank you very much to the mayor of Kansas City, Quinton Lucas, on KCMO.